Zoe was 4 years old and dead asleep on his shoulder, her cheek pressed flat against the worn gray cotton of his hoodie, one small hand curled into the fabric like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. Under her other arm, clamped with the iron grip only a sleeping child can maintain, was Captain, a stuffed rabbit who had seen better days. One ear was permanently bent. The left eye was missing, replaced 3 months ago with a black button that didn't quite match. Zoe had not complained. She had simply looked at the button, nodded once, and announced that Captain liked it better this way because now he looked like a pirate. Marcus had not slept in 22 hours. He shifted Zoe's weight on his hip and walked toward the front desk. The man behind the desk was already watching him. His name was Derek, according to the brass nameplate positioned at a precise 45-degree angle next to a leather-bound reservation ledger that was purely decorative. Derek was in his late 20s, white, with the kind of haircut that cost more than Marcus's entire outfit and a posture that suggested he had been waiting his whole life for someone exactly like Marcus to walk through the wrong door. He did not say good evening. He did not smile. He looked at Marcus the way a security guard looks at a shoplifter, not with alarm, not yet, but with a kind of cold assessment that said I am deciding what category to put you in, and none of the options are flattering. Marcus had seen that look before. He had seen it in Atlanta, in Dallas, in Chicago, in every city where he had walked into a space that was too clean and too quiet and too white while wearing clothes that marked him as someone who did not belong. He had learned, over 42 years of being a black man in America, that there were exactly 2 ways to respond to that look. You could get angry, which was what they expected, or you could get tired, which was what they counted on. He was too exhausted for either option. I need a room, Marcus said. His voice was hoarse from the recycled airplane air. 2 beds if you have them, but 1 is fine. She's small. He tilted his head toward Zoe, who had not stirred. Captain's pirate button eye stared at Derek with the blank judgment of a stuffed animal that had witnessed far worse than a late-night hotel check-in. Derek did not look at the computer. Sir, he said, and the word landed with the particular weight of a man who had been taught to say sir in a way that meant exactly the opposite. This isn't the kind of place you can just walk into. The sentence hung in the air between them. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, not surprise, because he had stopped being surprised by this particular flavor of disrespect somewhere around his 25th birthday, but something older and more tired. Disappointment, maybe. Or recognition. The bone-deep recognition of a man who had spent years building something beautiful only to discover that the people who worked there would not have let him through the door. He could have said it then. He could have pulled out his wallet, shown his identification, watched Derek's face cycle through the 5 stages of corporate grief, confusion, disbelief, verification, panic, and finally the desperate, groveling apology that always came too late to mean anything. But Zoe was asleep on his shoulder. And Marcus had learned, in the 4 years since her mother walked out and never looked back, that there were some battles worth fighting and some worth postponing until you had gotten your daughter into a bed with clean sheets and a door that locked. Could you check the system? He asked, keeping his voice level. I know it's late, but there should be rooms available. Derek's jaw tightened. He had expected pushback. He had expected anger, or indignation, or at the very least the kind of desperate pleading that would confirm every assumption he had already made. He had not expected a man in a stained hoodie and worn-out sneakers to speak to him with the quiet, unshakable calm of someone who knew exactly how this conversation was going to end. He turned to the computer with the theatrical reluctance of a man who wanted it on record that he was being forced to waste his time. His fingers moved across the keyboard. The screen cast blue light across his face. And then, without looking up, he said, "Nothing available. We're fully booked." Marcus did not blink. He knew the occupancy rate for tonight was 62%. He knew because he had checked it on his phone before the battery died, standing in the jetway at JFK with Zoe's hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers and a gate agent apologizing for the 3rd time about the missing stroller. He knew because he was the one who had designed the reporting dashboard that tracked occupancy rates across all 14 properties in the portfolio, and he had spent 6 months arguing with the board about whether 60% occupancy on a Tuesday night was a problem or an opportunity. He was the chief operating officer of Meridian Hospitality Group. He was the man who had built this hotel. And the man behind the desk, the man who had not bothered to look at his face long enough to recognize it, was lying to him with the casual ease of someone who had done it before and would do it again and would never, not once, be held accountable. Marcus felt Zoe shift against his shoulder. She murmured something in her sleep, something about captain, something about pirates, and then she settled again, her breath warm against his neck. He could have ended it right there. Marcus did not have to wait long to learn what kind of establishment the Meridian Grand was, not at its core, not when the lobby was empty and the cameras were just decorative bulbs screwed into the ceiling by contractors who had never been told whether they were supposed to be real. 3 minutes after Derek lied to his face, the glass doors swept open and a white couple walked in like they had been summoned by the universe to teach Marcus a lesson he had already learned 1,000 times. Derek's transformation was so complete, so instantaneous, that Marcus almost laughed. Almost. The slouch disappeared from Derek's shoulders. The bored contempt drained from his face and was replaced by something that looked, if you did not look too closely, like professional warmth. Good evening, welcome to the Meridian Grand. How can I assist you tonight? The man in the navy blazer did not bother to smile back. He said his name was Harrison, spelled it out like Derek should already know it, and announced that they needed a suite. Not a room. A suite. They had not made a reservation. They had not called ahead. They had simply decided, somewhere between their third martini at the airport lounge and the Uber ride downtown, that they would stay at the Meridian Grand tonight, and so they would. Derek did not mention that the hotel was fully booked. He did not suggest they try somewhere else. He did not even glance at the computer screen with the theatrical reluctance he had deployed for Marcus. Instead, his fingers flew across the keyboard with the eager efficiency of a man who understood exactly what was expected of him. He found them a suite on the 14th floor, a corner unit with a view of the park, and he offered it to them at a rate that Marcus knew, without needing to check, was lower than the standard corporate discount. The entire transaction took 4 minutes. Marcus timed it on the clock above the elevator bank, the one with the Roman numerals that had been imported from a clockmaker in Geneva because the design team had decided that regular numbers were not luxurious enough. 4 minutes from door to key card. 4 minutes for people who had not planned, had not reserved, had not done anything except show up and be white and wealthy in a lobby designed to welcome exactly their kind of person. Marcus stood near the seating area, Zoe still asleep on his shoulder, her stuffed rabbit with the missing eye pressed between her chest and his. He did not move. He did not speak. He watched Derek hand over the key cards with both hands, a gesture of deference so practiced it looked like muscle memory. He watched Derek lean forward slightly, lowering his head just enough to signal respect without crossing into obsequiousness. He watched the woman in the fur coat take her key card without looking at Derek, without saying thank you, without acknowledging that a human being had just solved a problem she had not even recognized as a problem. Marcus's face showed nothing. That was a skill he had developed in boardrooms full of men who assumed he was the caterer, in school pickup lines where white mothers clutched their purses tighter when he walked past, in 1,000 small moments where showing anger would have been used as proof that he was the problem. But his eyes were working. His eyes were cataloging every detail, every micro-expression, every choice Derek made when he thought no one who mattered was watching. The way Derek's gaze flicked to Marcus once, just once, and then away. The way his smile tightened at the corners when he realized Marcus was still standing there, still watching, still holding his sleeping daughter like she was the most precious thing in the building. The couple disappeared into the elevator. The doors closed. The lobby fell silent again, the kind of silence that pools in expensive spaces after midnight, thick and still and waiting to be broken. Marcus walked back to the front desk. Zoe shifted against him, murmured something about captain, about the pirate ship, about whether the treasure was real. He adjusted his grip on her, one hand cradling the back of her head where her braids were starting to come loose, and he looked at Derek with the same calm, level gaze he had used before. "I'd like to speak to the manager." Derek's eyes rolled upward, a full theatrical rotation that would have been comical if it had not been so ugly. He let out a sigh, the kind of sigh that was meant to communicate how exhausting it was to deal with people like Marcus, how tedious, how predictable. He did not bother to hide his contempt this time. The white couple was gone. The performance was over. "The manager's busy," Derek said. "I'll wait." Derek stared at him for a long moment, searching for something, anger, aggression, anything he could use to justify calling security. He found nothing. Just a tired black man in a stained hoodie, holding his sleeping daughter, asking for something that should have been offered the moment he walked through the door. "Fine," Derek said, and the word came out like a dismissal. He picked up the phone behind the desk and dialed 3 digits. "Richard, need you at the front desk." "Yeah." "Situation." Richard appeared 3 minutes later, and Marcus knew his type before the man even opened his mouth. Mid-50s, salt and pepper haircut in a style that had been fashionable 15 years ago, a suit that was expensive but not well fitted, the kind of man who had climbed high enough to feel powerful but not high enough to feel secure. Richard did not wait long. The man who emerged from the back office wore his authority like a cologne that had been applied too heavily, the kind that entered the room before he did and lingered long after he left. "And?" Richard turned to Marcus, and his face arranged itself into an expression of professional concern that did not reach his eyes. "Sir, I understand there's been some confusion about your reservation." "There's no confusion," Marcus said. His voice was steady. "I had a reservation. Your system cancelled it. I'm asking you to fix it." Richard's smile tightened. "As my colleague explained, we're fully booked tonight." "You haven't checked." The words landed flat and clean, no accusation in them, just fact. Richard's smile flickered at the edges. "Sir. My name is Marcus Williams. The reservation was under Williams. I booked it 3 weeks ago. I have a confirmation number." Richard's jaw worked for a moment. "Mr. Williams," Richard said, and the name came out of his mouth like it tasted unfamiliar, like he had to reach for it. "I assure you, I have full confidence in my staff's handling of this situation. If Derek says there are no rooms available, then there are no rooms available. I'm going to have to ask you to." "Ask me to what?" The question hung in the air. Richard blinked. "I'm holding my daughter," Marcus said. "She's 4 years old. It's past midnight. I have a confirmation number for a room I paid for. So I'm asking you again. What exactly are you going to ask me to do?" Richard's professional smile had vanished entirely now. What replaced it was something harder, something that had been waiting underneath the whole time. He straightened his jacket, a small gesture of self-importance, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped the pretense of courtesy. "I'm asking you to leave the premises." He reached for the radio clip to his belt and said 3 words that changed the temperature of the entire lobby. "Security to front." They came from the hallway near the elevators, 2 men in black uniforms with the particular bulk of people who had been hired specifically for their size. Not hotel staff, not really. They were the kind of men who worked night shifts at places that needed problems to disappear quietly, and they walked toward the front desk with the unhurried confidence of people who had done this many times before. The lobby had not been empty to begin with. A couple checking in late had paused near the entrance, their rolling suitcases forgotten at their sides. A businessman in a wrinkled suit who had been nursing a drink at the bar had turned on his stool to watch. 2 women in conference lanyards had stopped their whispered conversation near the elevators. The space that had felt cavernous and empty minutes ago now felt small and crowded, the weight of eyes pressing in from every direction. Marcus felt the change in pressure against his shoulder before he heard the voice. "Daddy?" Zoe was awake. She had lifted her head from his shoulder, her braids mussed from sleep, one cheek printed with the pattern of his hoodie. Captain was still clamped under her arm, the stuffed rabbit's one good eye staring out at the scene with the same blank expression it always wore. Zoe blinked slowly, the way she always did when she woke up somewhere unfamiliar, taking inventory of where she was and who was there and whether she needed to be afraid. Her eyes found Richard first. Then the security guards. Then the small crowd of people who had stopped what they were doing to watch. "Daddy, why are they making us leave?" The question was not loud. It did not need to be. In the marble and glass silence of the Meridian Grand's lobby, a 4-year-old's voice carried like a bell. The businessman at the bar looked down at his drink. One of the women in conference lanyards shifted her weight uncomfortably. The couple near the entrance exchanged a glance that contained an entire conversation. Marcus looked at his daughter, and something in his face softened in a way that Richard's had not. He shifted her weight on his hip, adjusted Captain so the rabbit wouldn't fall, and answered her the same way he answered all her questions. Honestly. Simply. Without condescension. "Some people think we don't belong here, baby." Zoe considered this. She was 4, which meant she was still young enough to believe that adults were generally good and rules were generally fair and hotels were places where people helped you when you were tired. She looked at Richard with her big brown eyes, and then she looked at the security guards, and then she looked back at her father. But isn't their job to help people? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when someone says something so true that no one knows what to do with it. The businessman at the bar set his glass down with a soft clink. One of the security guards, the younger one, shifted his weight from one foot to the other and looked at the floor. Behind the front desk, Maya had stopped pretending to work. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and a name tag that read MAYA, front desk associate in the same gold lettering that was everywhere in this hotel. She had been standing near the reservation terminal since Richard arrived, and she had not said a word. But her face was doing the kind of work that faces do when people are trying very hard not to feel what they are feeling. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed on the marble floor in front of her. Her hands were clasped together on the desk, knuckles white. She knew. The phone was in Marcus's hand before Richard finished his next breath. He did not look at the screen. He did not scroll through contacts or hesitate over a name. His thumb moved with the muscle memory of a man who had made this exact call in his head 100 times. The call connected on the first ring. Thomas Webb answered the way he always answered when Marcus's name appeared on his caller ID. Not with a greeting. Not with pleasantries. With silence and the sound of a chair creaking as a man sat up straighter. Marcus spoke 4 sentences. His voice was low, the kind of low that carried further than shouting ever could because it made people lean in to hear it, made them understand that whatever was being said was not for public consumption but was absolutely for public consequence. "Thomas, I'm in the lobby. Bring the board. Now." He hung up. Not because he was being dramatic. Not because he wanted to make a point. But because there was nothing else to say. Thomas Webb had been the CEO of Johnson Hospitality Group for 11 years. He had been Marcus's father's right hand for 8 years before that. He knew what bring the board meant. He knew what now meant. Marcus slid the phone back into the pocket of his jeans. The motion was unhurried. The kind of unhurried that made Richard's jaw tighten because it did not look like a man who was about to be escorted out of a hotel. It looked like a man who was waiting for something to arrive. He stopped himself before he said the word. Not because he was decent. Because even Richard, in that moment, understood that there were lines you did not cross in front of a 4-year-old girl holding a stuffed rabbit, and whatever word had been rising in his throat was one of those lines. He swallowed it and pivoted to the security guards instead. Escort them out. Now. I want them off the property in the next 60 seconds, and I want a full incident report on my desk by morning. If this man so much as breathes on the front door again, I want him arrested for trespassing. The older security guard stepped forward. His hand moved toward Marcus's arm. Marcus did not move. He did not flinch. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice or his hands or his eyebrows. He simply stood there with his daughter on his hip and his dead wife's stuffed rabbit under her arm and an expression on his face that was not anger or fear or even defiance. It was patience. The patience of a man who had been waiting a very long time for a very specific moment and had just been told it was about to arrive. Zoe tugged at his hoodie. "Daddy," she whispered, and her voice was smaller now, smaller than it had been when she asked about staying, smaller than it had been when she asked if the security guard's job was to help people. "I don't like him." She pointed at Richard. Not subtly. Not politely. With the full arm extension of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned that you were supposed to pretend not to notice when adults were being terrible. Marcus looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Richard. Then he looked at the security guard whose hand was still hovering 6 inches from his arm. "She doesn't like you," Marcus said. "And my daughter has excellent judgment." Richard's face did something complicated. It was trying to be angry and dismissive and amused all at the same time, and the result was a twitch that made him look like he was having a minor medical event. "Get them out," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. The security guard's hand closed the distance. And then the elevator dinged. It was a soft sound. A polite sound. The kind of sound that a 5-star hotel elevator makes when it has been engineered by people who understand that luxury is not about volume but about texture, about the way a thing feels against your ears rather than the way it demands your attention. In the silence of the Meridian Grand's lobby, that single ding landed like a judge's gavel. 3 men stepped out. Thomas Webb was in front. He was 63 years old and looked 50, the kind of aging that happened to men who had inherited good genes and then spent decades paying people to preserve them. His suit was charcoal gray and had been cut by a tailor in Milan who did not advertise and did not need to. His shoes made no sound on the marble floor, not because they were cheap but because they were expensive enough to have been designed by people who understood that true power did not announce itself with footsteps. Behind him were David Chen, the CFO, and Patricia Okonkwo, the chief legal officer. They were dressed the way Thomas was dressed. They walked the way Thomas walked. They looked at the scene unfolding in front of them the way Thomas looked at it, which was to say they looked at it like they had been expecting it for years and were not surprised, only disappointed. Thomas did not look at Richard. He did not look at the security guards. He did not look at the small crowd of guests and staff who had frozen in place like mannequins in a department store window. He walked directly to Marcus. "This is Marcus Johnson," Thomas said, and his voice was not loud, but it was clear, the kind of clear that happened when a man had spent 40 years in boardrooms and understood that the most important words were the ones you did not have to repeat. "He is the founder and sole owner of Johnson Hospitality Group. He owns this hotel. He owns the Meridian Grand Chicago, the Meridian Grand Atlanta, the Meridian Grand Dallas, and 17 other properties across 6 states." The words landed like a hammer on glass, and for a moment, nobody moved. Thomas Webb did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply turned his head slightly, acknowledging the security team with the kind of minimal movement that men like him had perfected over decades of being the most important person in every room they entered. "Gentlemen," he said, and the word was not a greeting, "I believe you were about to escort Mr. Johnson out of his own hotel. Is that correct?" "A dress code concern," Thomas repeated, and the way he said it made the phrase sound like something you would find stuck to the bottom of your shoe. He turned to Marcus. "Marcus, would you like to handle this, or shall I? Marcus looked at Richard. Not through him. Not past him. At him. The way you look at a problem you have finally decided to solve. Richard, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out, Marcus continued, and now he did gesture, a small motion with 2 fingers toward the men who had been about to put their hands on him. The same way you were about to escort me out. I think that's fair. Don't you? The security guards did not hesitate. They turned toward Richard with the synchronized precision of men who had just realized they had been standing on the wrong side of a very expensive line and were now desperately trying to cross back over it. The younger one actually straightened his uniform before he spoke. Mr. Richard, if you'll come with us. Richard did not come with them. He stood his ground, and his face did that complicated thing again, the thing where it was trying to be too many things at once and failing at all of them. Mr. Johnson, he said, and his voice had changed now, the authority drained out of it like air from a punctured tire, I had no idea. You were dressed like, you were wearing, I was protecting the hotel's standards. That's my job. That's what you pay me to do. Marcus shook his head. Slowly. Once. The only standard you violated tonight is the one that matters. He let the words breathe. He let them find their mark. Every person who walks through our doors gets treated with respect. Not based on what they look like. Not based on what they're wearing. Not based on whether you think they belong here. That is the standard. That has always been the standard. And you failed it. Richard's face crumpled. Not into tears, men like Richard did not cry, not in public, not when there was still a chance to salvage something, but into the desperate, scrabbling expression of someone who was watching their career dissolve in real time. Please, he said, and the word was small, too small for the lobby, too small for the marble and the chandeliers and the 40 feet of corporate air above his head. I can make this right. I've been here for 6 years. I've never. You've never been caught, Marcus said. That's not the same thing. He turned away from Richard. Not dramatically. Not with satisfaction. The way you turn away from something you have finished with. His eyes found Derek, the younger desk clerk, who was standing behind the counter with his hands pressed flat against the polished wood surface. Derek was shaking. Not visibly, not in a way that most people would notice, but Marcus noticed. Marcus had spent his entire career noticing things that other people missed. Derek. Derek flinched. Yes, sir. Mr. Johnson. Sir. Marcus walked toward the desk. Zoe stayed where she was, watching her father move across the lobby with the same expression she had worn when she pointed at Richard and announced that she did not like him. It was not quite understanding. It was not quite confusion. It was the look of a child who was learning something important and did not yet have the words for what it was. You made a mistake tonight, Marcus said, and Derek nodded so fast it looked like his head might come loose. You followed orders you knew were wrong. You watched a man and his daughter get treated like criminals because of how they looked, and you did nothing. You said nothing. You just stood there. Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I'm not going to fire you. Marcus let that land. Let the relief wash over Derek's face before he continued. But you're going to learn what this job actually means. You're going to go through retraining. Not skills training. Not how to check in guests or process payments. You're going to learn about dignity. About respect. About what it means to treat every single person who walks through that door like they matter. He paused. You'll keep your job. But you'll learn what it actually means to do it. Derek nodded again. His eyes were wet. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I will. I'll learn. I promise. Marcus did not respond to the promise. Promises were cheap. He had learned that a long time ago, in rooms far less comfortable than this one, from people far more dangerous than a desk clerk who had failed a test of basic human decency. What mattered was what happened next. What mattered was whether Derek showed up for the retraining and actually listened. That was out of Marcus's hands now. All he could do was give the man the chance. He turned to the small crowd of staff members who had gathered near the elevators. Housekeeping, maintenance, kitchen staff, a few front desk employees who had come in for the evening shift and walked into something they had not expected. They were all watching him. Some of them looked nervous. Some of them looked curious. One of them looked different. Maya was standing near the back. 3 months had passed since the night Richard Sterling tried to have him removed from his own hotel. 3 months since Thomas Webb had flown in from Atlanta and cleaned house with the quiet precision of a man who had built an empire by knowing exactly when to swing the axe and exactly when to let the tree fall on its own. Richard was gone now, his career a smoking crater, his name whispered in hotel management circles as a cautionary tale about what happened when you confuse the size of your office with the size of your character. And Marcus still owned the hotel. That part had not changed. What had changed was something harder to name, something that lived in the way the staff looked at him when he walked through the lobby, the way the security team nodded with something closer to respect than obligation, the way the marble floors seemed less like a monument to exclusion and more like a surface that could be walked on by anyone who had business here. Zoe was 5 now. Her birthday had come and gone 2 weeks ago. She had asked for 3 things, a new dress with pockets, a book about space, and to visit the hotel again. The first 2 had been easy. The third had taken him 3 days to agree to, because he was not sure what he wanted her to see, or what he wanted himself to feel, walking back into the place where he had almost lost everything. But here they were. Zoe sat in the armchair beside him, her legs too short to reach the floor, swinging in a rhythm that matched the rain against the glass. She wore the dress with pockets, a deep blue that reminded Marcus of the toy car from another lifetime. Captain was tucked under her arm as always, the stuffed dog's one remaining ear flopping over Zoe's wrist like a salute. They were watching the front desk. Not the main counter where the business travelers and the tourists checked in with their rolling luggage and their expectations of luxury, but the side counter, the one closest to the door, the one where Maya was standing in her new uniform with her new gold-edged badge and her old, unshakable calm. The family came in at 4:17 in the afternoon. Marcus saw them before the door had fully closed behind them. A black man in his late 30s, wearing work boots and a high-visibility vest still smudged with the gray-white dust of a construction site. A woman beside him, her dress simple and clean but faded at the shoulders, a sleeping toddler balanced on her hip with the practiced ease of a mother who had been carrying that weight for years. They carried 2 canvas bags between them, the kind that cost $5 at a discount store and lasted about 6 months before the straps gave out. They did not have rolling luggage. They did not have the look of people who stayed at the Grand Meridian on 5th. They had the look of people who were not sure they would be allowed to stay anywhere. The man stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes scanning the lobby with the quick, defensive calculation of someone who had learned to measure threats before measuring welcome. The woman shifted the toddler on her hip and touched her husband's elbow, a small gesture, the kind of private communication that couples developed after years of navigating spaces where they were not expected to belong. Marcus recognized that gesture. He had made it himself, a lifetime ago, when Dana was still alive and they were still young and the world had not yet taught them how many doors would close before they found one that opened. Maya looked up from her terminal. She saw the family. She saw the canvas bags and the work boots and the toddler and the way the man's shoulders were braced for rejection. And she did something that made Marcus's chest tighten with an emotion he did not have a name for. She walked toward them. Not with the stiff, professional stride of a hotel employee approaching a potential problem. Not with the barely concealed suspicion that Richard had worn like a second skin. She walked toward them the way you walk toward guests you have been expecting, guests you are happy to see, guests whose presence makes your day better simply because they arrived. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian," Maya said, and her voice was warm, genuinely warm, the kind of warmth that could not be faked or trained or written into an employee handbook. She stopped a respectful distance away, her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture open. Then she did something that Marcus had not expected. She crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with the toddler, who had woken up and was staring at her with the owlish curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of strangers. "Hi there," Maya said softly. "I love your shoes. Are those dinosaurs?" The toddler looked down at her feet, which were encased in bright green sneakers printed with cartoon stegosauruses. She nodded, a single solemn dip of her chin. "I thought so," Maya said. "I'm Maya. What's your name?" The toddler whispered something that might have been Keisha or might have been Sneeze, and Maya nodded as if she had understood perfectly. She straightened up and turned to the parents, her expression unchanged, her welcome undimmed. "Do you have a reservation with us today?" The man hesitated. His hand went to his back pocket, then stopped. We booked online. Last night."